Midnight rain beat the metal roof of the Frontier repair yard, and neon signs flickered like tired eyes. The human mechanic stood alone among sleeping drones and half-fixed skiffs. Counting the last credits in his register, he liked quiet nights. Cheap tea and simple work. He did not like trouble. A shuttle dropped out of the dark with no beacon and no request. It landed crooked on the pad, hissing steam. The door opened, and a royal envoy stepped out in a wet cloak, guards at his back. Between them walked a woman in pale bands of silk and ironed the alien princess everyone had heard about. The one the court called childless, she is a gift, the envoy said with a thin smile. A gift for services to the crown, and a warning not to refuse a king. The mechanic felt his jaw tighten. People were not gifts, but the guards. Hands rested on shock spears, and the rain sounded like 1,000 small knives. He lifted his palms, calm and open, and nodded once. "Fine," he said. "She can come inside and get warm." He guided her past the dripping door into the bright, oily light. He offered a blanket, hot water, and a chair near the heater. Up close, he saw the cuffs, the tired shoulders, the stubborn chin. She did not look broken, only exhausted. "I am not a gift," she said, voice low. "I am bait. The king wants my name to die in a quiet place." Not in a court. On her brow lay a thin circlet, a royal band that should shine with living light when an heir is near. It was dark, dull as old tin. The court had pointed to that darkness and laughed. Childless, they had said. Useless. For the line, the mechanic cut the cuffs with a plasma bit and set the pieces gently on the bench. "You are safe here for tonight," he said. "We will think of the next step when the sun comes up." She watched him with careful eyes, then nodded. A sound at the back door made them both turn. He opened it to find a small alien child. Soaked and shaking, clutching a dented food can. "Please," the child whispered. "They took my mother for the mines." The mechanic stepped outside, pulled the child in, and shut the door fast. Through the thin glass, patrol lights swept the lane. The guards were still nearby, checking doors. The mechanic crouched to the child's height, offered a towel, and said, "You are safe." As he spoke, the princess's circlet flickered once, faint and quick. They stared at it, shock in both faces. The band went dark again, like it had only dreamed of light. "What did you do?" The princess asked, voice a whisper. "I only told the child he is safe," the mechanic said, confused and uneasy. "Old law says the crown glows for living bonds," the princess said, thinking fast. "Courage. Care. Choice." She stood, her strength returning. "If that is true, there is still a path for me." He did not know royal law, but he knew machines, and he knew danger when he felt it. Boots thudded outside, heavy and close. Searchlights climbed the workshop wall like white fire. A fist hit the door. Hard, then again. "Open for inspection," a voice barked, cold and sure. The mechanic looked at the princess, then at the child. He reached for the breaker, killed the front lights, and pointed to the service hatch under the bench. "Down," he said. "Now." The door latch began to turn, and the circlet flashed bright as a heartbeat in the dark. The latch turned once, twice, then stuck against the deadbolt the mechanic had set. In the dark, he lifted the bench, slid the service hatch aside, and waved them down. The princess went first with the child, the circlet a dim ghost on her brow. He followed last, lowering the hatch and sealing it with a magnet clip. Boots thundered above, and flashlight beams crawled across the floorboards like searching insects. In the crawl space, air smelled of dust, metal, and old rain. The mechanic tapped his wrist light twice, a small cone of glow guiding their knees and hands. "Keep low, keep quiet," he whispered. "We take the maintenance line to the canals." They moved through a ribbed tunnel where cables drooped. Like black vines, the child shivered. But the princess wrapped her cloak around both of them, steady and calm. A grate rattled behind. Voices echoed. The guards had found the hatch and were dropping in. The mechanic pointed to chalk arrows he had scratched years ago for fire drills. At a junction, he killed his light and listened, counting heartbeats against the distant boots. Left sounded hollow. Right sounded wet. Wet meant the canal. Wet meant escape. They crawled right until metal became stone and the tunnel opened to a storm pipe. Cold water licked their hands, running fast from the night rain. They slipped down a ladder and into ankle-deep flow. The pipe humming like a drum. The princess touched the circlet and spoke softly. Like she was waking a friend. Courage, care, choice, she said. These are the tests of the crowns. Light. The king told the court the band only shines for blood heirs. That was a lie. The mechanic kept them moving, but he listened, saving every word. The oldest law says the crown seeks a living bond first, she continued. When a royal protects life freely, when care is given, when a choice is made, the light answers. The moment you shielded the child, the band remembered its purpose. He glanced back at the child, who stared up with wide, wet eyes. I only did what was right, the mechanic said, almost apologizing to the dark. Right is what the king fears most. The princess answered, a small, tired smile. On her lips, the archive under the dunes holds the first law carved in starstone. We must reach it. Water deepened. The pipe widened, and the city's underbelly opened like a maze. Silt fans turned lazily. Pushing current toward the canal mouth, he timed the blades, counted between sweeps, and ushered them through when the gap came. A siren moaned somewhere above, the kind that means curfew and trouble. They found a maintenance door, painted yellow and crusted with salt. The mechanic bridged the lock with a strip of copper and a clipped lead. The door clicked, swung, and the smell of river air rushed in, cold and real. They stepped into a low corridor lined with prayer tags and old worker posters. People used to hide down here during storms, he said. Almost to himself, the child tugged his sleeve and pointed at a hand-painted map on the wall. A faded arrow showed Dry Market stairs, and a scribble read daylight this way. The princess nodded. The circlet warmed, and hope felt close enough to touch. They climbed toward the promise of open air, boots careful on wet steps. The mechanic peeked through the final grate into a narrow brick alley. Night rain had weakened to a silver mist. Dawn still a rumor behind the roofs. He lifted the grate, eased it aside, and guided them into the alley's thin light. They took 3 quiet steps toward the street and the market beyond. A shadow slid across the alley mouth, hard and precise. Not a drunk, not a stray. A royal officer stepped in, armor clean, visor up, eyes like ice and orders. He leveled a shock spear, not at the adults, but straight at the child's heart. Inspection, he said, voice calm and cruel. Present. The cargo and the stray. The circlet flared like sunrise in the wet brick alley, and the spear began to hum. The shock spear hummed higher, and the air smelled sharp, like a storm inside a wire. The circlet blazed gold. The alley filled with warm light, and the officer blinked hard. In that blink, the mechanic moved. Fast and low, like a man who trusted his feet. He swung a coil of cable into the spear shaft. The hum cracked, and blue sparks spat. The officer stumbled, swore, and reached for a sidearm. The mechanic grabbed the child. The princess grabbed the mechanic's sleeve, and they ran. They burst. Into the waking market, steam rising from food carts, tarps snapping in the mist. Vendors yelled. Guards shouted, a bell clanged, and the crowd became their shield. They cut through crates, slipped under a chain, and dropped into a freight bay. A tired loader bot sat there, battery half green, eyes dim but obedient to a key. The mechanic flashed an old dock card. The bot chirped, and a side door rolled up. They shot through the door and out into the open salt road beyond the city walls. Dawn was a pale line above the dunes, clean and empty. The princess touched the circlet. Now a steady ember, and pointed to the far ridges. Beyond those is the first archive, she said, voice tight but hopeful. The Star Queens hid it under sand and wind, because power forgets, but stone remembers. They found a rusted dune skiff behind a fence of bones and wire. The mechanic hot-wired the core with a copper bridge and a prayer. The engine coughed, shivered, then settled into a hungry purr. He pushed the throttle, and the skiff skimmed the hard sand like a flat stone on water. Wind cut their faces, grit stung their teeth. The dunes rolled like sleeping beasts. Behind them, 2 black dots rose from the city. Growing wings of light, drones, fast and patient, sent to follow and mark. The mechanic kept the skiff low in the troughs, letting the dunes eat their shadow. By mid-morning, they reached a field of glassy rock that hummed like a bowl when stepped on. Here the princess knelt, pressed both palms to the stone, and spoke old words. The circlet answered, A. Thin beam sliding from its edge to a compass niche in the floor. The sand cracked, sighed, and a door shaped like a tear opened downward. Cool air spilled out, smelling of copper and rain. Though no clouds lived here, they descended a spiral ramp, walls lit by slow-breathing lights. At the core waited a round room, gentle and careful, full of old machines. A single table sat in the middle, a book of stone floating inches above it. The first law, the princess whispered. Fingers shaking now that safety felt possible. The child reached up, small hand finding her sleeve, and the circlet brightened. The machines woke like birds at morning, their voices soft and kind. Present your bond, a light said. Present your courage. Present your choice. The princess stood straight, tired but unbroken, and spoke the Starloth. I take this child under my name, under my bread, under my breath, she said. I will stand between harm and this life. By day, by night, by crown, the circlet bloomed to full light. Steady and clean, not a flicker, but a living pulse. The stone book turned its pages without hands, lines of silver flowing like water. Air appeared, the room sang. By oath and by act, recorded and sealed, a small disk grew from the table like a seed becoming fruit. It cooled in the princess's palm. Warm as skin, bright as promise. The mechanic fixed a winding capacitor near the wall so the record could finish. He knew how machines die when power drops at the wrong breath. The record completed, a seal mark formed on the disk, and the lights softened for a heartbeat. They let themselves breathe, 3 people and 1 new truth. Then the air shivered with a new sound, thin and cruel. Sand rained from the ceiling as a cutting torch ate the outer door. Shadows moved beyond the glass of the entry hall, precise and many. The king's elite guard had found the archive, and the last lock began to glow. Asterisk, the last lock burned bright orange, and the archive doors began to scream. The mechanic grabbed the seal disc and stuffed it inside his jacket. Move, he said, voice low but firm. The princess lifted the child. The circlet, steady like a small sun on her brow. They ran along a curved hall where the lights breathed slow. A side panel showed a maintenance map. Simple lines and circles. The mechanic traced a finger to a mark labeled service ramp 2. Up that way, he said. We reach a hidden exit under the ridge. The door blew inward behind them, sparks like angry bees. Boots hit stone. Metal sang. Voices clipped and cold filled the room. Seal the wings. Recover the artifact. Capture the traitors. A captain barked. Echoes chased the 3 as they climbed the ramp at the top. A low tunnel opened into a vault of pale glass. Inside rested a sand sled on a rail, old but clean, still fed by the archive's power. The mechanic jumped into the driver's cradle and pulled the wake lever. The rail hummed, the sled floated. and the tunnel ahead glowed faint blue. "Hold tight," he said, and the sled leaped like a fish. Wind slapped their faces. The tunnel bent left, then right, then up. Behind them, a pair of guards tried to follow on foot, then gave up. A drone launched from the vault and swept after them, quiet and sure. The tunnel spat them out into hard daylight on the lee side of the dunes. The sled slid off the rail and turned into a wheeled skiff with a cough. The mechanic gunned the motor and aimed for the long, low valley that hid a smuggler's road. Sand hissed under the tires like a sea of needles. The drone came high, black against blue, its lens drinking every move. The princess wrapped the child with her cloak and sat behind the mechanic to balance the skiff. The circlet threw a thin halo that made the air feel warm, even in the cutting wind. The child pressed both hands on the mechanic's belt and did not cry. 2 more drones rose over the far ridge, flying a slow box, patient and mean. The mechanic cut speed, slipped into the shadow of a broken ridge, and killed the engine. He pulled a rag from the kit and draped it over the engine cover to smother heat. The drones drifted past, looking for hot metal, then swung wide. They moved again, slow and quiet, using the ridge for cover. Every 100 meters, the mechanic stopped, listened, and tasted the wind like an animal. The city was a thin line behind them now, the salt road a ghost line ahead. "Almost there," he said, though his breath ran thin. At last, a scatter of towers rose from the sand, all pipes and patchwork and iron flags. The smuggler's port looked like a junkyard that had decided to live. Old friends kept rules here, simple rules: pay fair, keep quiet, never hurt a child. The mechanic waved to a woman on a crane, and she waved back. Surprised to see him, they slid under a canopy, the skiff coughing out the last of its strength. The crane woman tossed a cable and reeled them into shade. "Bad trouble," she said, eyeing the circlet and the child. "Worse than usual," the mechanic answered. "We need to jump off this rock." She nodded once. "Because favors remembered are better than laws." "Bay 3, she said. "Old freighter still holds pressure, not pretty, but it climbs." Sirens began to moan at the port edge, thin at first, then thick as rain. Royal transponders bloomed on a scanner board like blue mold. They ran for Bay 3, feet loud on the catwalk, hearts louder. The freighter door opened on a smell of oil and stubborn hope. The mechanic threw switches. The ship woke slow, lights blinking like sleepy eyes. Dock clamps rattled, fuel hissed. The ladder lifted, the hatch rolled. They rose on a column of hot air into a sky the color of steel. Stars peeked through the morning like pins in cloth. For a breath, it felt like they had done it, like the world had decided to be kind. Then the stars stretched, bent, and a shadow unfolded ahead of them. A royal cruiser slid out of nothing, black and sharp, guns like cold teeth. A tight beam hit the freighter and filled the cabin with the king's voice. "You will return what you stole," he said, each word clean as a blade, "or I will take your heir, and your ship, and your little lie." The princess held the child close, the circlet bright and brave. The mechanic stared at the cruiser and gripped the controls the way a man grips a promise. "Not a lie," he said under his breath. A record, a bond, a life. Alarms began to climb. The cruisers. Guns warmed, and the freighter shook like a drum. The royal cruiser filled the forward window like a wall of night. A cold voice poured into the cabin, each word sharp as glass. "You will return the princess, the stray, and the stolen seal," the king said, "or I will peel this tin can. Open and let space teach you manners." The mechanic kept his hands steady on the sticks. He bled speed, rolled the freighter's belly to hide the heat vents. He spoke without turning his head. "Calm for the child's sake. Strap in, breathe slow. Trust the ship," he said. The princess raised the seal disc, and the circlet glowed warm. "Open a public channel," she told the mechanic, voice clear. And calm, he flicked a switch and linked to the common net across nearby lanes. Traders, workers, and pilots began to hear their tiny ships speak. "I am falsely called Baron by a frightened crown," the princess said. "I took an oath to a child, and the crown answered with light. This is the seal of the archive under the dunes, recorded and true. Do not let a lie bury." Life on the cruiser, the king cut in with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He called the oath a trick, the seal a toy, the child a prop. He said the mechanic was a thief who craved reward and noise. He said the princess was weak and broken, and the court would fix her. Then a stream of voices rose from the lanes. A market courier said she saw the circlet burn bright in the rain. A crane worker swore that the child's shield saved a damaged shuttle at the port. A desert pilot pinged the archive coordinates and confirmed open power logs. The king's face changed like iron meeting water. His voice jumped from smooth to heat in a single breath. "You will shut that channel now." He shouted, "You will kneel, you will confess, you will beg." He leaned forward until only his eyes filled the screen. "No orphan will touch my line," he hissed. He cut the public feed and fired a clipped order to his crew. "Board them, vent their deck, seize the seal." Grapple lines shot out like hooks of light. The freighter shook as clamps kissed hull. Boarding beacons began to strobe in the outer corridor. Metal thumped, magnets locked, cutters sang. The mechanic rerouted power and killed the forward hatch motors. He fused 2 panels with a fast arc and smoked the hinges. He locked crew doors and looped cameras into mirrored loops. He whispered, "Hold a little longer, old girl." And the ship hummed back. The princess kept the public net alive on a narrow sideband. She read the first law again, slow and steady. She held the seal up so the camera could see its living light. The child pressed close, brave and small, and did not hide inside the cruiser. The king heard every witness and saw every glow. He slammed a fist into his armrest and barked a new command. "Cut their life support on deck B. Make them crawl. Let the liar's breath pay for his lies." The freighter lights flickered. Once, then again, then fell to a dim red. Fans slowed. The air lost its push. The cabin grew thin and dry. A cold ringing started in the mechanic's ears, and the gauges dropped like stones. He grabbed an emergency bottle and shoved it toward the child. The princess handed the mask to the child first, and then took a second bottle. The mechanic cracked a third and gave it to her, his own chest burning. He stared at the controls and forced a plan through the fog in his head. "O-bus, battery loop, manual pump," he muttered, fingers hunting for life. Warning lights bloomed, then died. Screens washed to black, only the circlet and the seal still glowed. Small and stubborn in the dark, the king's voice faded to a hiss. The hull creaked, the boards went silent, the air thinned to a whisper, and the world held its breath. Asterisk air thinned to a knife, and the mechanic's vision sparked at the edges. His fingers found the O-bus, bridged the battery loop, and kicked the manual pump with a wrench. A cough moved through the vents, then a tired push of air. "Then one more. Breathe slow," he said, voice rough. "We have a little time." The princess steadied the child and lifted the narrowband mic. Her eyes were clear, her hands did not shake. The circlet burned like a small sun. "I invoke trial by the old machines," she said. "Every word clean, on open record. In sight of any crown, by law, older than any king." The cabin lights fluttered as a new signal touched both ships. Far above, ancient court satellites woke like lions in dust. A lattice of invisible lines wrapped the cruiser and the freighter together. Engines fell to idle. Weapons froze. Life support came back under neutral control. The king snarled on the tight beam. but his helm lit with the same seal he could refuse. The trial and lose his throne by law, or accept and face judgment. Pride was a cage he had built for himself. He stepped into it again. Accepted, the court node said, voice old as rain on stone. A ring opened between ships, a hard light. Bridge with gravity and air. The mechanic gathered the child. The princess walked beside them. And they crossed on the far side, a chamber weighted round and bright, with 7 standing frames. In each frame slept a judge, half machine, half memory, all law, present courage. The first frame said, voice like a bell underwater. The room filled with a recording from the alley. Rain, fear, a shock spear aimed at a small heart. They watched the mechanic move without thought, a body choosing before the mind could argue. The circlet flashed in the memory, the judges marked the light. Given, they said, present care, the second frame asked, warm and steady. Voices poured in from the lanes and the port, 100 small screens around the wall, a crane. Worker cried as she spoke of a shuttle saved by a child's new shield. A courier swore to the glow in the rain. A smuggler signed that no child was harmed on her watch. Present choice, the third frame said. A softer sound, almost human. The princess stood tall, though travel dust still lined her cloak. She spoke. The star oath, again, slow and clear, under my name. Under my bread, under my breath, the child placed the sealed disc into the floor cradle. And the ring drank its light, silver letters rose in the air. Bright and simple air appeared, by oath and by act, recorded and true, the ring declared. Silence held for a breath, the kind that means a world is turning. The mechanic let out air he did not know he was holding, and the child squeezed his hand. The king exploded forward, rage breaking the thin mask he wore. From his sleeve slid a slim blade of dark metal. Silent and fast, he lunged not at the princess, but around her, straight for the child. Guards flinched. The court gasped. The judges lifted their heads like storms waking. The mechanic moved, no time to think, only a promise in his bones. He stepped between the blade and the small life behind him, arms wide, eyes set. Royal guards on habit raised their weapons, barrels bright with charge. Stand down, a judge thundered. But habit is slower than fear. Light swelled in the ring as defense fields tried to catch up. The king's blade came on. The guards' triggers pressed. The air snapped like breaking wire. The circlet flared so bright it painted the chamber gold. Everything moved at once, and the world chose which truth to keep. The blade met a wall of gold light that bloomed from the circlet like a sunrise. Energy rounds bent off that same light and hissed into the ceiling like hot rain. The child stood behind the mechanic, eyes wide but steady, trusting the promise he had already kept. The king stared at the frozen blade and at the shield he could not break, and his fury finally looked small. Judgment noted, said the first judge. Voice heavy as mountains, attempted harm to a sworn heir during trial. Proves unfitness to rule, said the second judge, calm as winter. Transfer of authority will follow the law as recorded, said the third judge, bright as morning. The wall of gold faded to a warm glow, and time inside the chamber breathed again. Royal guards looked from the king to the child to the mechanic, who still stood wide and unafraid. One by one, they lowered their weapons because habit is strong, but truth is stronger when you see it. The captain stepped forward, removed his helm, and dropped it to the floor like a sorry coin. He took the king's knife with careful hands and passed it hilt first to the judge's light. By the ring and by witness, we strip tyrant powers. From this throne, the old machines said together, royal name remains. But crown passes by law to the rightful line, they added. Steady and final. The king tried to speak, but the words dried like dust in a dead wind. He turned to the Doran found it closed by a quiet gravity he could not push. The princess lifted the child and stood in the center of the ring, simple and tall. She did not look at the king. Because some endings do not need anger to be real, she looked at the people instead, at guards and pilots and workers watching on. 100 small screens. This child is not a rumor or a tool. She said, soft but clear, "This child is my heir, by oath." The circlet shed a soft crown of light that touched the child's hair like gentle hands. The sealed disc shone in the floor cradle and echoed the same pulse. The judges bowed their metal heads, and the chamber lights shifted from trial white to coronation gold. A thin band grew from the ring, woven of light and wire, and it settled on the princess's brow, crown recognized. The court note announced to the lanes and the worlds beyond. Regency begins until the heir is grown, with the star oath carried in public keeping. It continued. The mechanic stood a little to the side, grease still under his nails, heart still hammering. The princess turned to him and smiled like a person who has survived the storm and can finally name it. "For courage, for care, and for your free choice, I name you Shield Consort." She said, "Guardian of the people, keeper of old laws, and builder of bridges where fear once lived," she added. The guards struck their chests with open hands, a salute older than any single crown, on the public net. The port crane woman cheered, the courier cried again, and the smuggler laughed like a bell. The judges issued one more order. Cool and clean, the former king will walk the cold moon and answer to the families he harmed. They said his voice will not be silenced. Only made to listen first, they added, because even punishment can teach. The ring opened, and the guards escorted him out. Not as a ruler, but as a man who had lost his way. In the days that followed, the new court read the first law aloud in every market and dock. No child by blood or by adoption would be called less than another. No oath given in courage and care would be mocked by power again. Papers changed, school pledges changed. And the quiet rules people hold in their bones changed too. The Frontier Repair Yard hung a small copy of the seal above its door like a promise you can touch. The mechanic fixed skiffs and kettles with the same old patience, but now people brought him more than machines. They brought small questions about fear and big questions about fairness. And he answered with simple hands and steady eyes. The princess visited without guards when she could, and the child learned the names of tools before the names of planets. On the night before the first public festival, the city lights looked like soft constellations fallen to the ground. The mechanic stood on the roof with the heir on his shoulders, and the circlet glowed like a friendly moon. Music rose from the market, and the old siren tower rang a new tone that meant gathering, not curfew, when a human keeps a promise. Even a crown must listen, the princess said, and the knight agreed.